Welcome everyone. My name's Kathy. I'm a librarian here with Central Coast Council, and I'm coming live from our library at Carryong. So if anyone doesn't know where that is, it's just at the end of the freeway as you turn off to go to Gosford. And it's also the gateway to our hinterlands here on the Central Coast. So we're celebrating Harvest Festival, not this weekend, the weekend after. And so this is our opportunity to get into the vibe, into the groove of cooking and gardening kind of thing. So we thought that we'd kick off with a pickling workshop. We have Alex Howery-Smith here from Cornersmith in, I'm going to say Marrickville.
We're in the Inner West, yes.
Inner West.
Yeah.
Inner West, but they also have, they have a cooking school, they have a cafe, and Alex is also the author of numerous cookbooks as well too. So we're in the hands of an expert here to show us how to pickle all that beautiful fresh produce that is coming from our farming communities here on the coast or wherever you may be. Now, before I hand over to Alex to start the pickling workshop, I'd just like to acknowledge the land on which we meet today and pay my respects to elders past, present and emerging. I'm on Darkinjung land here on the Central Coast, and I encourage you all to pop where you're from in your in our chat bar, and welcome Alex. Thank you.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Kathy, and thank you everyone for signing up and coming to watch a pickling workshop in the middle of the day at the end of the week. I really appreciate it. So like Kathy said, my name's Alex. I own a business called Cornersmith. And we're based in Sydney. So we have a cooking school, which we run out of a Potts Point location at the moment. And we run workshops in traditional skills. So, but trying to give them a modern contemporary edge to make sense for our busy lives that we're living now. So we run classes in pickling, in fermentation, so you can come and learn how to make sauerkraut and kimchi, in jam making, in all preservation. And then we also run classes in things like salad making and how to make tofu at home, dumplings. So we're really trying to get people interested in and confident to cook from scratch at home. I also have a cafe in Annandale that I own with my husband, James. And I've written quite a few cookbooks, as Kathy said. So I have 3 out there. The latest one was called Use It All. And it's how to use up everything that's already in your fridge, in your pantry, in your fruit bowl to make delicious meals, but also to make sure that you're not throwing things in the bin that could otherwise be used. And another one, if you are interested in pickling, is called Salads and Pickles. And that one's just full of, it's all vegetable based, lots of salads and lots of pickling. So keep an eye out for those ones. But today, I really just wanted to tell you how easy it is for pickling. I will just really briefly let you know how I got into it. I'm not a trained chef at all. I'm a really enthusiastic home cook, I guess, and a slightly obsessive person in general. So once I heard about pickling and preservation, and realized how important a skill it is, I got really crazy about it, and I jumped on it and I pickled everything that I could possibly pickle. I'm like those people from Portlandia. And really, you can pickle anything. Please do not pickle a banana. It's disgusting. I've done it. And please do not pickle a potato. That was equally as revolting. Other than that, I am up for you guys to pickle whatever that you want to pickle. I got interested in pickling when I was home with my babies when they were little, and I was trying to figure out how to feed my family sustainably, but in the city, because I really like living in the city and urban areas, and we have a busy life. And but I wanted to feel like I was connecting with food, and I wanted to understand where my food came from. I wanted to understand the cost involved in my food and how to make the very best choices I could, not just for my family, but for the community and the environment as well. That was probably about, my children are giant teenagers now. So 15 years ago, we weren't talking about food and environmentalism quite as much. And now we just have to have that conversation. So food waste from homes is one of the biggest places that we're, there's so much food going into bins. And that's not because people want to waste food. It's because they don't quite know or have the skills or the confidence of what to do with all the odd bods and the bits and pieces. So today in this pickling class, I'm going to teach you how to pickle to fill up your pantry and be adorable and be a homesteader and show off to all your friends. But I also want to show you what to do with like this one wobbly bit of celery that I know you all have in your fridges as well. So I'm going to teach you 2 recipes. One is, I guess we'll call it proper pickling, that you can pop into your pantry and you can let that sit for a really long time. And the other one is the quick pickle. That's like a 20-minute kind of recipe that you eat quite quickly. And I call it pickling your compost. You kind of clean out your fridge and you turn it into something delicious. Just don't tell your friends when they come over. So pickling is a very old-fashioned food craft that's been around forever, and all cultures pickle differently. In this class today, I want to teach you the easiest version, which is vinegar-based pickling. So that's where we're using vinegar to stop the growth of bacteria. So I'll just show you a jar of pickles. This is a carrot pickle, and you can see that liquid that's on top of there. That's called the brine, the vinegar brine, and that's what's keeping the vegetables preserved. So preserved means to make something last longer. So if you had too many zucchinis or too much fennel or way too many chilies, they're not going to last for very long if you just keep them in your fridge. So what I'm going to show you how to do is use a vinegar base to really make things last longer, and it will go on for years. 2 years is what I meant to tell you, but honestly, I've got stuff in my pantry that's been there for more than 5 years, and it's totally fine. I just don't tell my kids how long things have been hanging around because they freak out. So what I want you to do is think about firstly what pickling actually is. And it's anything, it's a fruit, it's a vegetable, it could even be seafood that is under a vinegar brine in order to make it last longer. And in the class, I will talk you through which vinegar to use, what sugar to use, and all those vital things as well. The next thing that you've got to understand is that bacteria, so molds and things like that, need oxygen in order to grow. So what we want to do inside this jar is make sure there's plenty of vinegar and it's so acidic that no mold can grow, but also that there's no oxygen inside that jar. And I'm going to show you how to make sure that is a sealed jar and that can then store in your pantry as well. Bacteria and molds and yeasts also don't like high temperatures. So we're going to bring everything up into a very high temperature, and that's what's going to keep our food safe and make it last for a really long time. The other great thing about pickling is that it's bloody delicious. So not only are we making food last longer, we're also making something really yummy as well. And I think people get a bit unsure about how to eat pickles. Like, it's like, what, on a burger? But I would really like you to think more about introducing pickling into your everyday meals as well. So you have it on cheese toasties, definitely have it on a burger. Finely slice any kind of pickle and mix it through a salad, and it will just give your salads so much extra zing and flavour as well. So we eat pickles in so many different ways at Cornersmith, and my main piece of advice is to just start having them on the table, and then people start gobbling them up as well. So to get started, first you're going to think about what you'd like to pickle. We've already said that bananas and potatoes are off the cards. Other than that, you can really give anything a go. So if a vegetable has a high water content, and when I say that, I mean if you think about cucumbers, zucchinis, gherkins, onions, chocos, green mangoes, all those vegetables have quite a lot of moisture in them. So if you pickle them as is, it's going to get quite soggy. And in pickling circles, a soggy pickle is unforgivable. No one wants to eat that. So you're going to try and make that crunchy by salting it first. So my advice, if you're doing a zucchini or a cucumber, is to thinly slice it, just in like a 20-cent round, pop it in a bowl and sprinkle it with salt. The ratio that I use is like 1 kilo of vegetables, 1 tablespoon of salt. You mix that through with your hands, and you just let it sit for a couple of hours. So I've got here the kind of salt that I use. You don't have to get this one specifically, but what's really important, I'll just put that up to the screen, it's called Olsen's salt. What's really important about this salt is that it has nothing else in it but salt. So if you choose a salt that's got anti-caking agent in it or added iodine or any other ingredients, it can make the brine, so that liquid around your vegetables, quite dark or a bit cloudy. So my advice there is to find a salt that's just got salt in it, nothing else. And I don't mind if it's from the river or the sea or the lake, but I just want it to be salt. And just a little reminder that we live on an island and we're surrounded by salt, and all these salt producers dotted around our country need our support. So let's leave the Himalayan salt and the Maldon salt from the UK to the side and try and get an Australian one as well. So you've salted your vegetables. When you come back, you'll see that they're sitting in a pool of water. I want you to get rid of that water and then you can start pickling. So for vegetables that are denser, which might be carrots, fennel is another really great one. That's what I'm going to pickle today. Green beans, cauliflower, chilies, beetroots. I mean, you can pickle anything. Those vegetables don't need to be salted. They're just going to go raw into the jar. So just a reminder, you think about, does it have a high water content? Does it need to be salted? Or do I just chop it up and it goes straight into the jar? If you salt something that doesn't need to be salted, nothing bad will happen. There just won't be any water in there. So when you come back the next, in a couple of hours, you'll go, oh, don't need to salt that one next time. All right, so you've chosen your vegetable. Then you're going to figure out how to slice it up. Now, when you're starting out, no one's going to win the Easter show or the Country Women's Association or your local fair if you've never pickled before, because filling up those jars is quite tricky. So for newbies, I recommend just slicing it. I've sliced up some fennel there. So it's just quite thin slices that would be really yummy, tossed through a salad, on a cheese plate, on a toasty, something like that. So I think slicing them is quite easy to do. With the carrots, I did that lovely little matchsticks, which is nice as well. But if you wanted to do beetroots, yes, you could do slices, or you could do wedges, or if they were really little, you could leave them whole. It's very like pickling. I shouldn't say it, but once you know how to pickle one thing, you know how to pickle everything. I mean, still buy my cookbooks because they're very handy, but you've got this, I've given you a really great recipe that's kind of going to make you be able to pickle anything. So just start experimenting. So from there, you've got to make your pickling brine. Now, the pickling brine consists of 4 ingredients. The first one is vinegar. Now, when you're choosing your vinegar, it's a bit like the salt. You don't need to buy the fanciest vinegar that exists, but you need to buy a vinegar that you like the taste of. I don't want you to use balsamic vinegar or sherry vinegar or raspberry vinegar. They're too strong in flavour. So I'm thinking white wine vinegar or apple cider vinegar would be the best way to go. Or if you can get your hands on some nice rice wine vinegar, that's a great one if you're doing more Asian style flavours of pickles as well. So when I pickle ginger or chilies, I often use a rice wine vinegar too. I buy it in bulk, so I buy these big 5-litre containers. That might be a bit much for you guys. But at the supermarket, they sell a brand called Cornwell's, and it's fine. It's not the best vinegar. If you want to get really fancy, you're going to want to get a slightly better quality vinegar. But what's the most important thing is your vinegar is 5% acidity. So it usually says it on the bottle. If it doesn't, and you're buying it at the supermarket, then I'm like going to guarantee that those vinegars do have a really high acidity because they don't want anything going wrong either. So that high level of acidity is what's keeping our vegetables safe as well. Then to make your brine, and I have pre-made one here, but it's really easy. You do 4 parts. Now, I don't mind if that's teaspoons or cups or litres, depends on how much you're pickling, but it's 4 parts vinegar, 2 parts water, and 1 part sugar. So in my pot here, I did 2 cups of vinegar, 1 cup of water, and half a cup of sugar. And that's kind of a good amount. Like that will make a couple of jars. It's not too much. And then I did about a teaspoon of salt. But if you've already salted your vegetables, you probably don't want to add too much more salt into the brine. So the salt is to taste. The kind of sugar you use is important. I know people want to be a little bit healthier and use brown sugar and raw sugar. The issue with that is it's very full of flavour and it's quite dark as well. So I recommend for pickling just a white sugar or a caster sugar because it has no colour and it has no flavour. But having said that, when I pickle something like beetroots, I might do raw sugar because I'm happy for it to be a bit a bit dark and a bit more caramelly in flavour as well. So that's kind of up to you. And you can mix sugars together too. So I've made that brine. It just all goes into the pot, and then you just put it on the stove and turn it on. And really you're just looking to bring that up to the boil. You don't need it to boil for very long. It just needs to get really hot. So you've made your brine and you've chopped your vegetables as well. Now, I don't know if everyone is familiar with fennel, but it's one of these vegetables. So it's got the bulb down the bottom. It's around now and it's really cheap and really yummy. And it's got the stalks that come up, and then it's got those lovely fronds at the top as well. The kind of cooking that I do is about encouraging people to use the entire vegetable. So the bulb makes a great pickle. The bulb also is delicious just cooked or as a salad, but those stalks are really great. They're really yummy, and they make a great pickle because they're quite dense, so they keep a lot of crunch in them. So please don't throw that away. Just thinly slice it and add that to the rest of your pickle as well. And then please don't be afraid to eat the fronds. That's like a herb. So have a little taste of it. It tastes a little bit somewhere between like fennel, like an aniseedy kind of parsley or dill is the flavour profile. So if I have bought fennel, I often don't buy more herbs, and I just use that as my herb for the week. But in this case, I'm going to pop that through the rest of my pickle because it's so delicious as well. Now, if you wanted to put a little bit of onion in through here as well, just thinly slice it. And you're just making enough to fill as many jars as you want. So if you guys are going off to the farmers markets and buying, a box full of produce, you might not get through it all. So I would recommend taking half of it and pickling it for later in the year as well. My number one top rule with pickling is it has to be in season. You are not allowed to buy cherries not allowed. I'll get you in big trouble if you buy cherries in the middle of winter and pickle them. So what we're trying to do with that is eating seasonally is the most sustainable choice that you can make in your kitchen. So think about what's growing around you. Think about that we don't want, so much stuff coming on planes and flying in. The environmental cost of that is really huge. So seasonality is the best change you can make in your kitchen if you're looking to do good things for the environment in your home as well. So you can see there, I've mixed through, hopefully you can see that, the fennel slices and all the fronds as well. And I will just chop up one of those stalks. And don't forget, this doesn't have to just be for fennel. So if you wanted to do this with carrot, that would be fine. Green beans are one of my favourite pickles, but I just leave them whole. They're really easy, and I just put them straight in the jars as well. So you've made your brine, you've chopped up your vegetables, and then you've got to think about flavour, and that's where the fun bit comes in. So I'll tell you the classic spices, which are mustard seeds, dill seeds or fennel seeds, peppercorns, and then something kind of warm. So that might be a few cloves, an allspice berry, a little bit of cinnamon, some chili flakes, just something that's got a bit of warmth in it as well. So I've made a mix, and you can buy mixes, I think, at the supermarket as well, that have all those flavours in there. But everyone's got a spice cabinet full of stuff that they just don't use or don't know how to use. So I want you to go and rifle through there and start, that star anise that you bought for an ottolenghi recipe 5 years ago. I want you to go and look in your spice cabinet and start using those things up. I want you to use whole spices, not ground spices. So ground spices will make it too murky inside the jar. And then I want you to look in your fridge and see what else you've got hanging around. So I had this, which is a little bit embarrassing to show you, but that's the bottom of some dill, like a bunch of dill. So it's got the roots and the stems there. Now there is so much flavour in there. I know that's so ugly, and I wouldn't give that away as a gift, but if I put, give them a good wash, if I put a few of those in the jar, it's going to impart a dill flavour without me having to go and buy dill. So I want this to be really, not only a really yummy skill and a really, satisfying creative skill, but also a way to combat food waste as well. If you had one garlic clove left over, that would be awesome. If you had half a lemon, what I'm going to do here is just peel off a little bit of the yellow, and that's going to go in my jar. And then my pickled fennel is going to have a nice lemony flavour to it as well. A piece of ginger could be good. A chili, if you had one chili left over. So just have a little look around and think about flavour. There's lots of flavour in your kitchen without having to go and buy spices as well. So we have made our brine. We've talked about spices. The spices that you put in there, it depends how heavy you like the flavour, and that's up to you. So if you like big, bold flavours, go heavier on the spices. If you like things a bit milder, ease back a little bit. What you'll find is that the flavour develops inside the jar. So if you're going to let it sit for 2 years, ease back a little bit. But if you're going to eat it next week, then go heavy so the flavours can develop. So for this, I'll probably put in 2 teaspoons of mixed spices, and I'm just going to mix that through. You could also just put the spices in the bottom of the jar as well, which is also fine. And then I'm just going to mix that through. Once it comes now, so the brine's hot, the vegetables are all ready to go and they look very pretty, you've got to think about your jar. So I am a big believer in secondhand jars because there's too many jars in the world. These are just, that's an old, I think that's an old pickle jar, but jam jars, salsa jars, pesto jars, save them all. All you need to do to make them sterilised is to give that a wash. So you could just run it through the dishwasher or through the sink, and then you pop it in the oven. So I just pop all my jars on a baking tray or like a lasagna tray, and they go into the oven. Then you turn the oven on, and it's about 110 degrees, so hot but not too hot. And what you want to do is get those jars nice and hot and completely dry, and that's what's going to stop the growth of bacteria. So that's for those parts, just for the jar. For the lid, lids have an acid-proof coating, and that's not very good in the dry heat of the oven. So what I'd like you to do is boil that for 5 minutes. That's the safest method if you're looking to fill up the pantry with all your pickles and preserves. So you're putting that into the oven and you're boiling that for 5 minutes. That's it. I don't want you to freak out about sterilisation. You don't need to sterilise your knife, and you don't need to run around flapping. This is a food craft that's been done, not in science labs, not in big fancy kitchens. Like, it's a home food craft. So just use your common sense around that. So with the jars, with the secondhand jars, as long as there's no cracks, they're absolutely fine to use. So then you let your jar cool down so you can handle it. This is sterilised. And using clean hands or tongs if you want to, we're going to put all the pickles into the jar. When we're doing this, especially for sliced pickles, you want to get as much in there as you can, but you also don't want to damage the fruits and vegetables. So it's a firm pack. You want everything to be nice and tight, but you don't want it to be so tightly wedged in there that we can't cover it in brine. It's good to do it over the bowl because it's a bit of messy business, this one. And I'm just shoving it all down in there. If you were doing grapes, please pickle some grapes. They're so yummy. If you were doing grapes, you're going to have to work a little bit harder and kind of play Tetris to fill up that jar properly. So I'm just going to hold that up. You can see how I've filled it just to the thread there, and then I'm going to cover it with the brine. So I can hear my brine boiling now, so I'll go and get that. And I just pop the brine into a jug. You do want the brine to be hot. It doesn't need to be crazy hot, but you do want it to be hot when you're pouring it on top. And then I'm going to pour it in. Now I'm going to do this nice and close to the camera because what I want you to see is that I am slowly pouring it so that every nook and cranny gets filled up. So you can see as it's coming up that all the little pieces of fennel are getting entirely covered. You have to remember that everything needs to be covered in brine. What I'm going to do now, sorry, I'm so close. Sorry, my face is so close. I hope you can see it, but there's some air bubbles in there. An air bubble is a ball of oxygen, and we need to get rid of that because we don't want any oxygen inside the jar. So to do that, I'm just going to grab a knife, just a butter knife is fine. And I'm going to get my knife and I'm going to go all the way around, and I'm going to release out any air bubbles. And some vegetables will create more air bubbles. It depends on how you've chopped it. So I'm just popping that down on the bench now, and I'm pressing everything down to make sure that all the fennel is covered in the brine. And I can see there that I could actually get a little bit more in the jar. So I'm just going to slowly put a little bit more in there. What I don't want you to do is have the vegetable pieces touching the inside of the lid, because when we seal that jar, we need there to be a little bit of space. So you can see here, sorry, big face again. There's a little gap, like 1/2 centimetre gap at the top. That's where the lid, when it seals, can come and sit down inside there. So if everything's right up at the top, the lid won't seal. And then we just put the lid on. And that is a jar of pickles. Now, that was really easy. It's not difficult to do at all. It's a good way to clean out your pantry at the end, your fridge at the end of the week, and also use up all the spices. But if we popped that in the fridge now, like if you had enough and you're like, oh, I did that, it was great, but I'm over it, you could pop that in the fridge. And I would say that would last for about 2 or 3 months. So it's quite a long time, even if it's just going in the fridge. I can't give you an exact time because I don't know what bacteria is on your fingers, or I just don't know what's going on, but you get quite a lot of time with that one. But what I want to teach you now is if you're looking to fill up your pantry, and that means that these are shelf stable and they're fine to just pop into the wherever you want, a cool, dark place. So if you're looking to make things last, you need to get a saucepan. Kind of the biggest saucepan you've got, a stock pot or something like that is good. And you're going to grab a tea towel, just a folded up tea towel, and you're going to pop that down in the bottom of the saucepan, just like that. So what I'm doing here is making sure that the glass isn't going to sit directly on hot metal, because that's when glass would break. So that goes into the pot. And I'd be able to fit sort of 4 in there. Like generally you make more than just 1 jar. Then I'm going to cover that with water. Now, if my pot was tall enough, I would be happy for this to be underwater. That's quite good. But my pot's not tall enough. So as long as it comes up about 3/4 of the way, you're absolutely fine. So I'll just fill that up with water. You can't see me, but you can still hear me. And basically what we do then is we put that on the stove, bring it up to the boil, and once the water starts to boil, that's when you go and put your timer on. Now, the timing is important. So if you have a jar that's that size, once it starts boiling, I want you to boil it for 10 to 15 minutes. It should say that on your recipe card. Over that 10 to 15 minutes of boiling, and not big, wild, crazy boil, like just like that kind of boil, a simmer, what happens? The inside of the jar comes up to a really high temperature, and that's the first barrier for the growth of bacteria. The second thing that happens is as it starts boiling, the pressure builds up and it forces all the oxygen that's still inside that jar out. So if it's underwater, you'll see all the air bubbles coming out, and that's a really good sign. The lid starts to puff up. So at the moment, the lid's flat like that, and it will start to puff up, which is great. And what that's doing is it's like the oxygen is just, any extra oxygen is getting caught underneath there, and then the lid is bulging. After your 15 minutes, if you are a true pickler, you have some of these. And these are called, I know they look like forceps, but they're not. They're called preserving clamps. And basically what they do is allow me, hopefully you can see, to pull very hot jars out of boiling water. Otherwise, you can use a very, very thick cloth. You can, please don't use normal tongs. I speak from experience. You will end up at the hospital with burnt arms. You can let it cool down in the pot. or weirdly, ski gloves seem to work. I mean, like, enter at your own risk with that one. But yeah, preserving clamps, we sell these online at our online store for about $25. I would say most good chef shops sell them. I don't know of one in the Central Coast, but no doubt you have a chef shop up there. And just make sure they've got some rubber in order to grab the jars. So 15 minutes, that's boiling away. When it comes out, you leave it on your bench top to cool down. So as it's cooling, the lid's puffed up, a vacuum forms inside and it sucks the lid down. And that's what your seal is. So your lid will be convex. So it's like a giant has stuck their finger down in the middle of the jar. And that's what the seal is. So when you open it, you'll hear a pop. You know, when you open a jam jar from the supermarket, you hear a pop, that's the seal breaking. So in that boiling water, we are creating a seal, and that's what's going to make it shelf stable. If you are convinced that your jar is sealed, pop it in the pantry the next day, like really let it settle on the bench, pop it into the pantry, and you've got years, many, many years in order to eat that. Please write on it what it is. Please put a date on it. You think you'll remember, but you don't. I've got the Lucky Dip cupboard. I have no idea what anything is. So don't do what I do. And that will allow you to slowly start filling up your pantry with the seasonal produce, with the stuff that's been excess in the kitchen, the garden, or what you've bought at the farmers markets as well. Once you go to eat your pickles, you're going to pick up the jar, and instead of having a use by date, you are going to connect with your senses. And I'm sorry to sound like a hippie here, but this is how we have to stop throwing food away. So I want you to look at it first. If it looks good, it's pretty likely that it is good. Then I want you to open it near your ear. Pickles shouldn't sound like anything. If you hear a fizzing, it's not a good sign. For sauerkraut, you want that. But for this, you want silence. So you want to hear no noise. Then you look inside. If it looks good, have a whiff. If it smells like vinegary and light and fresh, then by all means, go ahead and have a taste. If it's very dark or cloudy or a white bloom has grown, I personally can't encourage you to eat it. But what I want to say to you is that we eat white mold on cheese and on salami. We see it anywhere else and we have a panic attack. I can't tell you to eat mold. My business will go, I'll get arrested or something. But what I want you to do is be mindful that something really is off before you throw it away. So yeah, enter at your own risk. But it's for this kind of pickling, it's really hard for anything to go wrong. The main reason people have issues is that they don't seal the jar correctly. There's heaps of vinegar in there. There's sugar. There's salt. It's been heated. It's like, this is the foolproofs kind of preserving. Making strawberry jam without sugar, that's where you're going to have lots of problems. So that is the pickling that you have to start experimenting with, to use up beautiful things that you fall in love with or scrappy bits from the cupboard, and then to fill up in the pantry and start giving those away as gifts as well. People can't believe it when you give them a jar of something handmade, especially in the lead up to Christmas. It's a really nice thing to do. The other thing I wanted to show you is quick pickling. So quick pickling is that one I was saying, like, I've got one old ugly whatever. I've got half an onion that someone shoved in the fridge when I wasn't looking. So those kind of things, sure, you can make a jar of it and fill it up, but I probably wouldn't bother. It's for those jars that you're making and filling up, you sort of want your produce to be in a bit better nick, whereas this one is for all the really ugly bits. So I've got a bit of celery, I had half a carrot in my fridge, and I've got half an onion. The trick to this one is very thinly slicing the ingredients, because it's not going to last for very long. So you really need that pickling brine to get right inside the vegetable. What I find is that the thinner that you slice it, the more delicious it is. So take the time, a little bit of extra time to very finely slice things. If you have a mandolin at home, be very careful, but that does give you very nice paper thin pieces. So this one, you don't even have to turn the stove on. You boil the kettle, and in a jug, you would put 1 cup of boiling water, half a cup of vinegar, 3 tablespoons of sugar, and maybe a teaspoon of salt. And you just whisk it all up with a fork, and it's really easy to do. So what I'll do is I've just boiled the kettle, so I'll do a cup of boiling water in there and half a cup of the vinegar of your choice. Don't mind which one you use, but again, stay away from the dressing vinegars. So half a cup of vinegar. And then I'm going to do a few tablespoons of sugar. So what the sugar's doing here is just taking the edge off the vinegar so it's not too strong. And the difference with this brine is that we're not using vinegar as the main ingredients. We're using water. And the reason why we do that is because we want this to taste delicious today. The pickles that are in the jar, as they sit in the pantry, that intensive amount of vinegar softens and allows the other flavours to develop. But you need that much vinegar if you're looking to store stuff because it needs to last for a long time. Whereas this is a quick one. It's probably going to last for 2 or 3 weeks in the fridge, and you're going to eat it like tomorrow if you want to. I'm having tacos for dinner tonight, so I'm very happy to be doing that little bit of onion in the fridge. I don't even pickle in a jar for this one. I put it in a container, I put it in a bowl, you could do it in a jar, whatever you want. You can do it in a glass. Like, it doesn't really matter, you just need a vessel. So I'm going to put my red onion in there. And I'm going to put, because I've got some garlic, I'm going to slice up a garlic and pop that in there too. And then if you had a bit of ginger, you know those knobs that everyone has that are getting a bit mouldy, just cut the mould off and pop one of those in. Some chili flakes would be nice, some coriander seeds, kind of whatever you've got, just use all the bits. I'll make that nice and garlicky. And then I'm just going to cover it with the brine. And honestly, in 20 minutes, I've got pickles. So this is probably what you're seeing when you watch MasterChef or when you're eating pickles at cafes and restaurants. People don't do a lot of the old school pickling, but they do this quick pickling method. So I just cover that, make sure everything's really covered. And you could do a mix of vegetables. So I could slice up some celery and put it in there. I could slice up carrot as well and pop the lid on. And in 20 minutes, that's going to be really delicious. What you'll find is that the brine will go a really lovely red colour. So that's a very pretty one. They will be delicious on tacos. You could have that through a salad. You could have it on a wrap. You could really anything. Toss it through a grainy salad would be yummy as well. And that's the one I'm going to eat in the next couple of weeks. And then the fennel pickle, I'm going to put in the pantry and have that later in the year. So what you're seeing here are these two, they're both basically exactly the same recipe, but they've got different outcomes with it. With this one, you don't have to be very particular. There's no sterilisation needed. There's no getting rid of air bubbles. It's just a fast method for small amounts of produce. And that's, I mean, everyone thinks that one's really delicious as well. The other good thing about pickling like that is that you could, if you had an old eggplant, which I just happen to have here, and this is a really ugly old boy, like it's been in there for so long, but my kids have decided they hate eggplants. I would roast that. So just put it in a tray with a bit of olive oil, a bit of salt and pepper, roast it, and then pour that same pickling brine on top of it. So a pickled eggplant ends up tasting like a sponge, like a pickled sponge, which is not delicious unless you roast it. And then you get a really good texture and some good caramelization as well. So for summer vegetables like capsicums and eggplants and zucchinis, that's a really nice method to char it and then to pickle it. And it also, the roasting hides all the sins of how long that's been hanging around in your fridge for as well. So don't be afraid of that one. And the last thing I want to tell you guys before I open up for questions is pickling fruits. So we don't pickle a lot of fruits in Australia, but we have heaps of fruit. Pears are around now. Please pickle some. They're so delicious. You have that through a like a rocket salad with Parmesan cheese and walnuts and your pickled pears, and it's amazing. You could have that on a cheese plate and everyone thinks you're very fancy. You may just want to amp up the sugar levels a little bit just to make that a bit more sweet and sour. but it's pickled fruit's really, really delicious. So if you have excess fruit, I want you to give that a go. Just make sure your fruit's quite firm as well. Once you have got the hang of pickling, there's really, the possibilities are really endless. And it's one of those crafts that's so satisfying. Like, I feel good. I mean, I'm at work, but I also feel good because I've cleaned out the crisper as well. So it's this 2-in-1. I've made something really delicious. I know nothing's gone to waste, and it's incredibly satisfying, but it's also quite a creative craft as well. So I don't want you to be afraid. People get afraid of the old skills because we don't have use-by dates, and we've become afraid in the kitchen to trust our own instincts as well. What I'm trying to do with this, with my whole business and the books that I write, is to take the nostalgia out of pickling and jam making and like my grandma, like that's lovely, but it needs an update. We need to know that we can use these crafts in our kitchens. You know, it might be every day. You might make pesto and pour oil on top. You might dry something. You might cover something in vinegar. They're all little preservation methods that make food last longer. I don't spend the weekend bottling apricots anymore because I'm too busy. My business is big. My kids are big. But what I do is use those skills on a weekly basis to make delicious food and to really minimize food waste. So really, there's not very much that goes in the bin in my house anymore. So please think about that as a way to, it's the future. It's the way that we need to operate our kitchens as well. I'd like to open up to any questions to see if there's anyone who didn't quite understand anything, who wants to pickle something specific as well. So Kathy, if there is anyone who'd like to ask a question.
Yeah, there are a couple of questions in the chat. So once you've pickled something and sealed it, when you open it again, how long will it last?
Good question. So that once it's opened, it goes into the fridge. So as soon as you open a pickle and you take some of it out to eat it, then you put the lid back on and you pop it in the fridge. It's going to last for a really long time. Like, I almost want to say another year. That's being generous with time. Somewhere between, again, it's with the use by dates. Like, I don't know how you manage your fridge and who you are. So if you put your spoon into ricotta and pop it in your mouth and then pop it in the pickle jar, like, hats off to you. I'm a bit like that as well. But you're introducing bacteria into the jar. Whereas if you keep everything clean, it's going to last for longer. So I would say somewhere between 3 months to 12 months. So quite a long period of time.
Okay. Sorry, I've just lost. Can you repeat your brine mixture amount for several jars? And for everyone online, I have popped the recipe and you do have it in your emails as well.
Great. So the ratio is 4 parts vinegar, 2 parts water, and 1 part sugar. But if you're looking just for a kind of, manageable amount, what I did today was 2 cups of vinegar, so that's 500 mils, 1 cup of water, so that's 250 mils, half a cup of sugar, and I did a teaspoon of salt. 2 cups vinegar, 1 cup water, half a cup sugar, a teaspoon of salt. That's for the brine. That's for your pickles that are going to go into the pantry. For the quick pickling brine, it was 1 cup of water, half a cup of vinegar, 2 to 3 tablespoons of sugar, and salt to taste. But as Kathy said, you will get those recipes. And when we say recipes, I kind of write these recipes that are more adaptable, I guess. So it's called How to Pickle Anything. And it will show you a lot of the stuff that we talked about today is in that information as well.
Okay, can you use honey instead of sugar?
Yes, you definitely can. There's 2 things though. Honey in small amounts isn't a preserver. So it's reducing down the preservation. But in this case, we're not using sugar as a way to preserve. Honey also has quite a strong flavour. So I don't want my vegetable pickles to taste like honey, but I would be happy for my pickled rhubarb or pickled quince or pickled fruit to have that honey flavour. So I will leave that with you, but it's definitely possible to do. You just have to know that it will taste a bit honey-like.
I guess it's whatever you're after in terms of that taste for that.
Exactly.
Okay, how long do you keep the jars in the oven for when you're sterilising them?
Sure, good question. So 10 to 15 minutes is what I would say, or until they're completely dry. If you leave them in there for too long, the glass can get a little bit brittle. And I really like people to reuse things multiple times. So if you're heating for really long periods and then reheating and reheating, I found that jars can crack, are more likely to crack as well. So keep that in mind. But yeah, until it's completely dry, which is generally about 10 to 15 minutes.
Okay. Have you pickled lettuce or kale?
So yes, in the Use It All book, there's an amazing recipe for pickled lettuce. It's for the crunchy lettuces, so I would say cos lettuce or iceberg lettuce. It's a slightly different method where you put salt and sugar on it, you squeeze it out, and then your pickling brine has got soy sauce, vinegar, sugar, and lots of ginger in it. And you cover it with that. Kale is not delicious pickled, I'm sorry. It's like a sea monster crawled out of the ocean into your fridge. So I don't want you to do that. But there's other things you can do with kale. I would do more kale chips and kale pesto rather than the kale pickle.
Okay. Have you pickled mushrooms?
Oh, yes, they're delicious. If you're doing mushrooms, though, what I want you to do is make that brine and then pop your mushrooms into the brine and soften them in there. Because, again, with the sponginess, they can have a bit of a strange texture. So just cook them a little bit in the brine before they go in the jar. We actually are in the middle of running all of our mushroom workshops. And so you learn how to pickle mushrooms. We make mushroom broth. We make mushroom dumplings. This amazing sort of mushroom duxelle, which is like a sort of really intense mushroom spread. We dehydrate mushrooms. It's all about mushrooms at the moment. So that's a good question.
Yum, I love mushrooms.
Me too.
How about pumpkin?
No, again, so when I was talking about the banana and the potato, what I realized is that those ingredients are quite starchy and they just don't absorb the vinegar well. So for the nerdy science brains out there, starches and vinegar seem to repel away from each other and it just doesn't make a great pickle. So pumpkin, and also because of its texture, it just sort of falls apart a little bit. But I would make pumpkin chutney is a really yummy one. And there's a recipe in one of my books, which is pumpkin, sesame and ginger chutney, it just blows your mind. Best thing I've ever made, I reckon.
I'll have to find that recipe. Quinces, you did mention pickling quinces, so you can pickle them?
You can definitely pickle them, but remember how disgusting a raw quince is. So again, make the brine, peel the quinces, core them, and cook them in the brine first so they get really nice and soft. But you still want to keep some, like don't let them fall apart. You want to keep some shape. Then they go into the jar and you pour that brine on top. So if you do them raw, it's going to be they've got that sort of tanniny dryness, that chalkiness that's not yummy.
Okay. Can we access the recording on YouTube? As soon as I can get it up on our YouTube channel, I will, and I will send out the link to everyone who's booked in, and I'll pop it on our Facebook groups as well too. So you will be able to view this. It just might take me a little while to get it up online, but it will be coming.
Excellent. We also have online courses that you can buy and you get to own them. So you have them forever. I have quite an intensive one in pickling where we go through 3 different recipes and it really makes you understand the craft of pickling. And the other one we have is a tomato one. So that's where I teach you how to can your own tomatoes, how to make passata and how to make tomato ketchup. Now it's not the season now. So you're going to have to save your money for that one. It's $75, but you get lots of information in there as well.
Good to know. Do plastic lids work for long-term pickles or is it only metal lids?
I would rather you use metal lids, and that's because of the seal. So often the plastic lids don't seal as well. The other thing that happens with plastic and vinegar is that if you're letting it sit for a long time, the vinegar can erode the plastic. So ideally, I would rather you use the metal lids. Or for shorter term pickling, I'm happy for you to use plastic as well. And with the lids, just make sure, I don't know if you can see this one, but it's got a bit of rust at the top there. I don't want you to, the rust worries me a little. So make sure they're in good nick. So that one, if something's rusty, I just store my spices in that one. And I just make sure the jars and the lids are both in good nick. I don't mind if it's a bit of a discoloration. So there's a bit of like, you know, turmeric that stained the inside of the lid, that's okay. But look out for rust and look out for dents because they can interfere with the sealing process as well of the pickles. I just want to give everyone another like why it's so important to pickle. And I know pickling's like delicious and it's, you know, a fun thing to do. But as I keep saying, we need to be more sustainable in our kitchens. This is like entry level. It makes, for me, when I was starting out, I felt like pickling kind of embodied everything that I felt like we need to think about in our kitchens. One is that you start to understand the seasons. So if you're not sure if something's in season, please go to the websites, it's all over it. Or if you go to the Woolworths, it's anything that's at the front there. So that's what's in season because they want to move it quickly. You get to decide what's going on inside that jar. So you're in charge. If you want to reduce sugar, if you want there to be more salt, if you don't want chili, if you only want to use Australian products, if you don't want additives, you're really in charge with that. And most importantly, we need to start giving gifts away that aren't just like more crap from the supermarkets and the malls. So home cooking is a really nice way to make people feel like you care. And then my biggest, just one more take home is this is the way that we're going to reduce food waste in our kitchen. So I really want you to get pumped about, become a waste warrior with me. Come on the journey with me.
Sounds amazing. I did see one more question that's come in there and now I've got to find it. If your jar didn't seal properly, can you reboil it?
Yes, 100%. So when you do like 8 jars at a time, maybe 6 of them seal and 2 of them don't. And that might just be the lid that is a bit of misshapen or human error. We don't know, but sometimes they don't seal. So what I do with those ones is I put the 6 that did seal in the pantry and the 2 that didn't, I just pop those in the fridge. Because don't forget, we've still got quite a long period of time to eat those and we eat those ones first. But yes, you can reseal them. The issue with that is though, every time they get sealed, the texture is going to get boiled, the texture is going to change. So if you're doing cucumbers, like if you're doing beetroots, that's quite dense, so that's going to be fine. But if you're doing cucumbers, I worry it might soften it too much down and the texture won't be as delicious. But you can do it. Yeah, a little bit mushy.
Bit mushy.
Yeah.
And Jill's popped in here. I don't know why I feared pickling. You've made it so clear. Thank you very much.
Yay!
And I have to.
That's what I want to hear. Everyone's so scared of it. And it's just that you need someone. We didn't grow up with this. I mean, if you did, then that's amazing. But we need someone to just go, you know what? It's okay. You got this. And have fun with it, really, I think is the main thing too.
And so with the, I just wanted to ask, so when you're pickling fruit, it kind of is more of, it's still savoury. So if you wanted to preserve fruit, is that method much different?
No. So, I mean, again, like I know I'm like not doing my business any justice because once you do one thing, you kind of know how to do everything. So canning fruit, yes, it's a different craft, but it's the same process. You just have to know, instead of a vinegar brine, you're using a sweet brine with no vinegar in there to bottle the fruits as well.
Okay, that's good.
Canning is lots of
fun.
That. Yeah. Get me back for canning. It's really good, especially in summer.
Yeah, when you have all those fruits in the fruit bowl that you just want to
exactly
not go to waste but can't possibly eat them all.
And canning your own apricots is like it's the best. Makes you feel so good about yourself. You fall in love with yourself.
All right. Okay. So I think we've gone through all the questions. I'd just like to say a very big thank you, Alex, for today. You've certainly inspired me to go and try my hand at pickling and see how it turns out. And everyone on the call, thank you very much for joining us. And if you're on the Central Coast, make sure you jump up in the car and go and check out Harvest Festival and see what's happening in our beautiful farming communities here. And thank you very much, everyone. And I hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.
Excellent. Thank you so much for coming, everyone. It was a real pleasure.